Hello and welcome back to Analyze Asia, a podcast dedicated to dissecting the pulse of business, media, and technology in Asia. This is your host, Carol, and today we are covering a new topic that we have never covered before, and that is China and its two sessions, the country's most important political meetings of the year. And because it's the first time that we're covering this topic on our show, so we got some help. We invited Zhou Xin from South China Morning Post. Now, Zhou Xin is the political economy editor for SCMP. Welcome to Analyze Asia.
Thank you, Carol.
So, Zhou Xin, this is the first time that you're on our show, and our listeners would love to learn a bit more about you and your background. So, how did you start your career?
I started my career, as a journalist at Reuters, covering Chinese economy there for 5.5 years. Then I joined Bloomberg. I also covered Chinese economy based in Beijing. And in these combined 11 years, I think I covered 10 National People's Congress, this annual thing. In 2015, I joined SCMP right before Jack Ma announced his big deal of this newspaper. And now it's my sixth year at SCMP.
Wow, I'm so glad that we have someone as seasoned as you to talk about this topic on the show. So again, what is your current role and what do you cover for SCMP?
Well, my current title is Political Economy Editor, because both political economy in it, because, it's very difficult to separate politics from Chinese economy if you're looking at China's growth. It's a kind of combination of economic policy analysis and also how Chinese economy is doing on the ground. So it's a very exciting beat.
And this is a question that we always ask professionals on the show is, what are some lessons that you can share from your career journey with our audience?
Well, I think you have to keep focused on one thing. And if you really think you can do this and you just keep moving on this. When I started my career by that time, China is starting to show that it's going to have the potential to be an important player on the international stage. But by that time, still most of the mainstream English media still focus on more of, the weird parts of China, not many serious journalists, looking at Chinese economy or Chinese economic policies. So, so this is a kind of becoming a niche for me. So I have to spend the last 16 years reporting on this beat. So it's becoming my advantage and also helped me a lot at SCMP.
So now let's dive into two sessions of 2021 and what it means for business and technology, which is what our audience care about the most. So can you first start by explaining what the two sessions are and what is its significance in the context to the outside world?
Carol, because this one, on the surface, it looks like another huge Communist Party gathering, thousands of people sitting in the same room and always raising their hands or clapping their hands and, just approve everything that presented to them. But behind this surface, this actually is very interesting because this is an important part in how the Communist Party rule the vast country. The two sessions officially is called National People's Congress and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. Which is, of course, sounds very awkward and sounds very boring. But in fact, it is an important event for what decided behind the curtains, what decided at the small meetings for the Chinese leadership to present to them to the whole country and more importantly to the whole world about their intentions, about their plans, about their strategic thinking of the country's future. And this is particularly important because we have lots of background and we heard lots of talks about how Chinese leaderships are thinking the East is rising again and the West is declining. And so what China is really trying to do, on multiple fronts, on its economy, on its technology, on the geopolitical fronts. And so there are many, many questions that to be addressed or to be answered that matters for the future of the country and the future for the world. And this event, the two sessions, which last for just 1 week this year, because usually it lasted for 2 weeks, offers some clues or very important clues on what the Chinese government is going to do in the next in the coming years. So if you care about how China is going to position itself, how China is going to deal with the rest of the world in the coming years, you have to pay attention to what they say or what they try to say, the message try to deliver from these two sessions.
Of course. And as you mentioned, usually it's about a 10-day event, right? But this year, just like last year, because of COVID, it has been shortened to just a week. And so what was on the agenda for 2021? And I know 2021 is a pretty special year for the party as well, right? Because it's the 100th anniversary, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Because the two sessions, usually it's lasting for 10 days, 11 days. I think I have the longest one for 13 days. But this year is the 7 days, due to the COVID-19 and have to cut kind of social distancing rules within the greater of the people. But still, the importance is not reduced. Usually, the National People's Congress is to approve the government work report and also approved reports from the Economic Planning Commission and top courts. But this year was particularly important because there's another key document approved by the National People's Congress. This is a 14th five-year plan and 2035 China vision. This is a plan, but this is a huge plan. I mean, this is basically what the Chinese government is trying to do in the next 5 years. It is, on one hand, it is very broad. It's about its strategic repositioning of China in the world and in history. On the other hand, it's also very detailed. It listed all the what kind of airports they will build, what kind of water dams they're going to build in the next 5 years.
It's also very long, isn't it? It's like 65 chapters.
Yes, it's very, very long. And Carol, as you know, these are kind of plans for outsiders. Some people will belittle this, the Soviet Union made its, 12 five-year plans, but didn't stop it from collapsing the 13th five-year plan. But for China, I think you have to be more serious. Given the economic weighting, given the technology capabilities, given the military power of China, and whatever they say certainly carries the weight and carry an impact for the rest of the world.
That's right. And I know, like we mentioned, it's a 65 chapter document, plenty for most people to read. And I'm not sure if there is an official English version released, actually, because I haven't been able to find one. I'm not sure if you know. So for those who are not going to have the time to read this very important document, can you briefly discuss, the key takeaways from the two sessions with respect to the 5-year economic plan and how it impacts specifically business and technology development in China?
Yes, the two takeaways, if there are, give me 5 minutes to break this down. The first one is China is becoming more confident and want to rely more on itself for future development. This is called dual circulation strategy, which means, after so many decades of relying on exports, relying on selling products to America and to Europe, to Japan for China's development. For now, China is saying, maybe it's time, to look at our own population. We have 1.4 billion people, basically the population is a combination of all the developed countries. So why can't we have this big enough domestic market so that we don't have to look at the Americans or Europeans to keep the huge manufacturing apparatus running. So this is one takeaway. China will spend more time on developing a domestic consumer market. But this one has challenges too, because to do this, you need to create a big enough middle income group. And this will be the challenge for the Chinese government, because the institutional arrangements are not there yet to merit the growth of a middle class society. And the second takeaway is China's technological self-sufficiency. And this is a more kind of response to the trade war and to technology restrictions announced by the Trump administration, now have been inherited by the Biden administration. China see very clearly a problem of choking points in its technology development, especially its reliance on, say, semiconductor imports. For China, Huawei Technologies, a Shenzhen-based company, for instance, it used to be the pride of the Chinese economy. It's a pride for the Chinese people. But because the US government has restricted Huawei's access to certain high-tech products, now Huawei is struggling. And this is not only a kind of heavy blow economically, but also it's insult to the national pride. So China, from President Xi Jinping and for every local government, the challenge is that China must develop its own technology system so that it will not rely on, or it will not put itself at the mercy of Washington. You can see this is already translating lots of policies on the ground. For instance, the government is showering fiscal subsidies and other preferential policies for chip projects. For if you want to set up a semiconductor factory, basically you're welcomed, red carpets of everyone. And I think Beijing know that there will be lots of wasteful investments, there will be lots of overcapacity, and not every project will be successful. But still, China is going to take the cost and still do it. So this is going to have far-reaching impact on the whole industrial layout. So if you are technology intensive, if you can have the potential, if your factory can help China to increase security of its value chain, certainly you will have lots of blessings from the Chinese government.
And I want to dive a little bit deeper into the technology aspect. So you mentioned, the development of semiconductors, chip design, etc. What are some other key areas that China plans to focus on, whether it's in the next 5 years or even for the longer term?
Well, I think in the Team's 5-year plan, they listed seven kind of area of technology that China will focus on, and also 8 areas of key area to upgrading the manufacturing. So you can find these, let me read the 14th 5-year plan just by my hand to see if I can still find them. So basically, this is, for instance, just to give you some examples about the technologies they want to really focus on. Artificial intelligence. This is the number one, because artificial intelligence for China is very important because it's technology for the future. And Xi Jinping has personally said, China has the advantage of becoming a leader in global artificial intelligence technology because China has a huge database. If artificial intelligence is machine learning, right? Yeah, the machine learn from the data. And China, as just said, have 1.4 billion people, have a certain huge data pool. So, which means China has the right algorithm that the machine can learn very quickly. So artificial intelligence is one key area. And secondly is quantum computing, quantum information. And this could be the future as well. When people making phone calls or have this communication, this could be the next generation technology so that China can ensure it's secure and also reliable communication system, this hack-proofing communications. And then the third I just mentioned is semiconductors. And interestingly, because of the COVID-19, because of the coronavirus, China has also highlighted the area of medical science. This is one thing that matters to the health of the people, so China is trying very hard to improve. And also are certain areas about genetic technologies and biotechnologies. This matters to China's strategic thinking about security. In the future, maybe China is foreseeing a kind of more hostile environment. There will be conflicts here and there. There will be more confrontations against the United States and other Western countries. So China has to make sure that everything is under Beijing's control. And one area is actually about grains, the seeding, etc. China plants lots of corns, but the seed corns are imported from the United States. It's genetically modified. Maybe China plants lots of wheat, but wheat are coming. The seed of the wheat, some of them are imported. So China is really trying to develop its own seeding and biotechnologies in this aspect. And the other things, the last thing, which is not certainly the least, is to some extent China is also trying to be like the Soviet Union in the 1960s or 1970s. China has to be seen as a leading technology power in terms of these very expensive projects into space or into deep ground into the earth. And these projects may not generate profits or generate financial returns immediately or in short term, but China has to be seen as one of the leading powers in these technology aspects. So you expect China to send more rockets and satellites into space in the coming years.
Gotcha. What about green economy or green technology? Are there any plans in that direction?
This is a very important is, Carol, just to get on point of China. Conventional wisdom is China's development model is too dirty. It's basically polluting a lot by empowering its economic growth by burning lots of coal. And China is certainly the largest emitter of greenhouse gases. For Xi Jinping, he has to change the situation. But the whole country's system, the whole country economic machine is still attuned to this kind of coal-centered energy structure. So Xi has making very bold announcements to the whole world that China will reach carbon neutrality by 60, and also to reach the peak of carbon emission by 2030. And these are the two self-imposing targets China upon itself. This shows a kind of commitment to a serious commitment to green development and to carbon neutrality. And for now, I think every local government and every state-owned enterprises has got the message that China is, the top leadership in Beijing is really serious about carbon emissions. So everyone is on the move. So in the coming years, we were going to see lots of changes in the energy consumption structure and also environmental projects. If we look back a little bit longer into the history, this change is particularly interesting. Remember in 2009, that was 12 years ago, and when the whole world gathered in Copenhagen talk about climate change, and China was basically the one who received almost all the criticisms. Because by that time, China think we should never accept any carbon emission caps, because any of these are kind of conspiracy from the developed countries try to limit our development. China have the rights to pump as much as carbon as it like into the air because China is a developing country and it's our rights, to do so. You can't blame us because it's a historical problem, right? You have your industrial revolution, you have developed your economy, and by, causing this global warming problem, and now you're asking China, a developing country, to do the harder job. So China cannot accept it. Yes, and China developed lots of even weird indicators like per capita emission. We should not look at the overall emission, but also per capita emission. Then by that means, of course, China still has a long way to go. But now this kind of arguments has completely been whitewashed from Beijing rhetoric. Basically, China has realized that it's in its own interest to cut emissions to protect the environment. So this is not something to please the Biden administration or to have kind of short-term nice things so that the two presidents can talk when they meet. It's a real commitment to a new way of development. As Xi Jinping said, at a key meeting, I think last month, it says this issue, the carbon neutrality issue, matters to the eternal development of the Chinese nation. So this is basically nothing is more important than this. So we are going to see lots of investments and lots of push from the Chinese government in terms of green development in the next decade.
As we would probably all agree, it's the best change of direction or attitude when it comes to the green economy. And because it's not only an internal issue for the Chinese nation, but for the entire world, right? Given, how many people and how much land China covers. So let's come back to the business and the economy for a little bit. So one of the biggest changes this year is that they revised the GDP growth rate to 6% instead of the 8 to 9% range, right? What is the rationale behind this revision, do you think?
Well, I think 6% is still a very decent number. And basically, this 6% growth is just to give a message to the local government, say growth is still important. But if we take an overall point of view, if you also look at the 14th five-year plan, there is no numeric target for GDP growth over the next five-year plan. So clearly, Beijing is playing down the importance of GDP. Its message is GDP is not everything. But for now, we still cannot totally forget about GDP growth. But anyway, 6%, it's not as strong as 9%, but it's still very impressive. And I think the real GDP performance will be much better than that, given the low base in 2020. I think 8 to 9% is quite possible for 2021 for China's economic growth.
That's right. I noticed that in the 14th five-year plan as well. So it's really a shift from a quantitative goal to a more qualitative goal for the long term. How is the Chinese government planning to, encourage innovation among enterprises and optimize, for example, supply chain, which is something that they've been known for?
I think for innovation, it's really rely on from bottom up. It can't be a top-down kind of planning. But the Chinese government is trying very hard to create this kind of favorable environment for it. For instance, if you are a high-tech company, you certainly can ask for more tax rebates. You can ask for more support from the government. And also China is trying very hard to bring some new policies that will typically help high-tech businesses. For instance, China has its five-year plan of how to attract technology talents from abroad. If you are a top scientist in Singapore or in Europe, you can be invited back to work for a Chinese institution or for a Chinese enterprise. Maybe the pay will be better. Maybe you don't have to worry about the schooling of your kids. Everything will be taken care of. And these kind of policies the Chinese government is.
Sounds like Silicon Valley a little bit.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Silicon Valley. For places like Shenzhen, I think it has a potential because A, the local government have the money, it has a deep pocket, so it can give lots of help to these knowledge researchers and scientists. And B, there are business potentials. For any creative person or innovative person, you really want your ideas turned into real products and even to change the world. And Shenzhen is certainly one of these places can make your dreams or make your designs into a real world thing and then improve the society.
That's right. They have quite similar weather as well. But also in regards to business, the Chinese government will increase lending from the big banks to small businesses by more than 30% this year, right? What are the implications to the macroeconomic situation in China and in this aspect?
Well, the background of these policies, this policies is that, China's, some economists argue that China's economic rebound from the thing is not balanced. It's tilting towards, it's in favor of big state-owned enterprises at the cost of small businesses, and small businesses matters for China's economic growth, but they didn't really enjoy much support as a big state-owned enterprises from the government. The Chinese government is trying to give basically the banks a push, saying you really have to do this job, you really have to help the small businesses. I think it's similar in every economy, whether people are happy or not, whether society is stable or not, it matters to the moment that shops, it matters to how these kind of small food stands are doing, how these small factories are doing, how these small workshops are doing. So China is, from this policy, you can see that the Chinese leadership is still a little bit worried about imbalance to rebound and want to give a lift to these small businesses.
And because we covered this topic quite extensively in previous episodes before, which is, fintech and what happened to and financial. So will the Chinese government continue to clamp down on fintech, with respect to what happened with Ant? Where are they with their own antitrust regulations? And do we foresee more coming with the fintech companies in China?
Well, I think it's a kind of like perceived perception that the Beijing is trying to clamp down on the fintech. But I think for the Chinese government, more of it's more of control risks. Certainly, China still want to enjoy this kind of convenience and efficiency brought by these new technologies in the financial sector. But on the other hand, China is really worried that if Beijing doesn't move in a timely fashion, there will be risks that are beyond control of these companies. And at the end of the day, it could be spread out to the broader society. And by that time, it is still the Chinese government has to stand out and clean up the mess. So they are kind of in a preemptive measure, or it's more of like just to draw some lines in the sand so that everyone can compete on the same rule. Because in the last decade, China's fintech businesses, online credit and these kind of business has grown exceptionally. They are not subject to the same regulation at the banks or the established financial institutions, because they always say, it's high tech, it's something that you don't understand. It's a new business model and you have to encourage this. But if we look at in the past few years, we can see that these kind of technology-enabled financial services, whether it's peer-to-peer lending or online credit, they have started to show kind of social and broader kind of economic cost. And this price is paid by the overall society. The Chinese government, after seeing these kind of troubles, is trying to lay some rules so that, the fintech can be developed in a more regulated manner. And that doesn't mean the Chinese government is targeting specific companies. I think for the Chinese government, it's more about like kind of, setting the rules for the game instead of, kicking out anyone out of the game.
Well, I totally understand. And next, I would like to ask some more larger picture questions, talking about some of the larger trends that have, very long-term implications for the economy and for the business innovation and technology, et cetera. And first would be, aging population. We all know that the Chinese birth rate is on the decline, and in a few decades, a very large percentage of the Chinese population is going to be 65 years and older. What is the Chinese government doing to plan for that?
Carol, you mentioned a very important issue because, when we talk about 14th Five-Year Plan, 2035 vision, it's all rosy, it's all, it has to be rallying because it has to be good. It's like, our country's future will be great. These kind of the key messages. But at the same time, everyone knows if you look at the Chinese economy, and there are certainly lots of challenges. There are lots of facts that could dragging down China's economic growth and clouding its economic future. And the population issue, the aging population issue, is certainly one of the elephants in the room. As you mentioned, China is aging very quickly, thanks to economic development. It's possibly more importantly, the ruthless implementation of this one-child policy for over 3 decades. And now it's a two-child policy. But still, it's unreasonable because it's basically restricting people's rights to have more than 2 kids. And for this, the Chinese government has started to see the problem. And that's why they are going to discuss kind of policy response. The first one is, of course, it's very knee-jerk in response. It's a later retirement age. For now, Chinese men retire at the age of 60, and the Chinese women workers, if you are engaged in labor, you retire at the age of 50. If you are office, you retire at 55. And Beijing is looking at it and they say, well, that's too young for people to retire, isn't it? So they're going to extend gradually. I think in the next maybe 10 to 15 years, the final retirement age for Chinese men would be 65, and maybe for women would be equally 65. So this is one policy response. And secondly, of course, China is trying to encourage the young couples to have more babies. For now, on the one hand, they still have this quota that you can only have 2. On the other hand, they are trying to say like, okay, we will provide more kindergartens, we are giving more holidays for new mothers, even new fathers. So this is going to be very interesting to see how effective the policies will be. But looking at the experiences, in Japan, in South Korea, in Taiwan, in Singapore, it will be a very uphill battle for Beijing to fight to encourage new births. In the coming days, I think in this week or next, the Chinese government is going to announce the result of the census. And that will be very interesting to see how many people China actually have. For now, official figures say China still have 1.4 billion people, but there are already some demographic researchers saying, China's real population should be around 1.3 billion, which means China has already dethroned the world's largest population to India. This is a momentous change, right? This is a kind of watershed if you're watching worldwide population. It's a very big topic, and I don't think the Chinese government having all the answers for now. Gradually seeing the problem, and as they bring up some new policies to handle it. But this will be something for us to watch in the coming decades. It's not coming for the coming months. Meanwhile, we have to say that although Chinese population, yes, is aging, the median age is now possibly above 40 now. But still, the education of Chinese people has been much, much better than the previous generations. For a man born in 1970, for instance, his chance of going to a university could be 2%. But for a boy who is born in 2010, for instance, his chance of getting educated in a university will be maybe 70%. So this is something that you have to also factor in. Although the overall population is aging very quickly, but China will have more talents. The people will not necessarily working tilting lands or working production line in a sweatshop factory. They can be more creative. They can create their own business. And if China can unleash this kind of creativity potential from a population, even though the younger generation are smaller, but if they have the better chances to shine, still the country's future can still be bright.
Now, you mentioned that this is one of the elephants in the room. Is there another elephant in the room that you can perhaps point out for our audience?
Oh, yes. For instance, conflicts with the Western world. The confrontation, how China, on the one hand, China will be the big player in the global economy, and it has a very intensive, very close trade and economic relations with the rest of the world. But on the other hand, it has been increasingly diverted in terms of values and ideologies. Let's mention, Xinjiang and Hong Kong, and how China is going to reconcile its own strategies with or the narratives with Western countries, especially the United States, the European. These are the huge kind of challenges, and how the South China Sea is going to evolve. Will there be military conflict? Or how China is going to take back Taiwan without war? How China is going to maintain that economic growth will be protected still when Beijing is exchanging sanctions against United States, UK, European Union, Canada. And these are all kind of big questions for China's future. The third elephant in the room possibly is China's the domestic debt. And according to some estimates, China now has the debt level is 300% of the GDP. And if with such a huge debt, how China can still maintain its rapid economic growth. If every debt has an annual interest rate 2%, and then 6% GDP means China can only just, cover its debt. These are very huge issues and problems. And no one really had the answer because there are so many factors can affect the final outcome. And that's also one of the beauties of watching Chinese economy, because it's like you're watching an exciting movie, but no one really knows how the movie is going to end.
I can see that you really enjoy your job, and I think that's awesome. And man, that was an elephant herd that you just unleashed to our audience just now. So that brings me to to my next question. What are the implications of the policy proposals in the 2021 two sessions for the rest of the world? Because our audience are mostly located outside of China. And what should these other countries look out for?
I mean, for a foreign business community who wants to do business in China, who want to profit from China's development, I think one area is that, one way to look at is what China's kind of future focus will be and what kind of role they can play. And for now, as I just mentioned, the two takeaways is one is a big domestic market, and whether your products can be suited for the Chinese consumer demands to upgrade their living. And then the second takeaway is technology self-sufficiency, and whether your company, if you are part of this semiconductor value chain, and what your product would be helpful for China to develop its own domestic semiconductor industry. These two areas I think would be key. But at the same time, I mean, it's not as direct as this, because even, for instance, as you probably watched these days, China has this huge boycott against H&M and Nike and Adidas due to controversy over the Xinjiang cotton issue. For foreign businesses who try to make profits or make business in China, these kind of challenges will be more standing out in the coming years than the past couple of years, because the whole country is becoming more confident. And sometimes when they become more confident, they also become more kind of sensitive to the challenges. So these are the areas that foreign brands and the company has to pay attention to.
Yeah, on the Xinjiang cotton issue, which I will not comment too much on, I think people have completely different context inside and outside of China, and so these conversations are just not even happening on the same field. But that's what our jobs are, right? Whether it's to put out these podcasts or for SCMP to put out these really important articles, is to facilitate more of that understanding, so that China and the rest of the world can be at least on the same page, discussing the same issues and reaching some kind of understanding. And we know that this entire two sessions, of course, covered so much content. So if our listeners, they wanted to learn more, because our time is, of course, limited in a podcast episode, where can they find out more?
SMP is definitely the answer.
That's right. And I know that SMP... Go ahead.
Well, from the SMP, maybe can pay more attention to the Chinese government website and stuff like that. Because the challenging for overseas analyst or a business investor, it's very difficult to find any useful information from the Chinese government website if you lack of this context. So you really rely on third-party institutions to give you the context and give explanation what's going to happen. Because for instance, the 14th Five-Year Plan, it's even for me, I'm covering these kind of documents for over a decade, but still sometimes I can't understand what the Chinese government is really trying to say. So it's kind of challenging. But I think if you keep reading, if your audience keep reading publications like SMP, maybe after a few years they can have a better idea what's going on about Beijing's policies and strategies.
There is, what's written, and sometimes that's not even available in English. And then there is, what they're really trying to say and what they're really, really trying to say. And it goes down quite a few levels. And I know that SCMP has a dedicated two sessions page or site. SCMP has kindly offered a 1-month free discount for 1-year subscription plan to all listeners of the Analyze Asia podcast. podcast. Go to subscribe.scmp.com and enter the promo code AnalyzeAsia. Terms and conditions apply. Well, and that was my last question, Zhou Xin. Thank you so much. You've provided definitely a lot of context and a lot of information to our audience. And just a few more closing questions. First of all, can you recommend anything that you've read or have watched or seen that has inspired your life recently?
Well, that's challenging because I'm reading a few history books about China's past, and one book that really caught my attention is a biography of Zhou Xin. The author is a very unique person. He was born in mainland China in the 1920s, I think, and later he went to Taiwan. He was put into jail in Taiwan, and then he spent the final parts of the year in the United States. And for this book, biography of Zhou Xin, the author is actually a scientist. He has no training in literature or history. And he writes this biography of this great Chinese poem simply because he found of sympathy or similarities of their fates. And that's why he wrote in such a touching way that you can almost, when he was writing, the stories happened 1,000 years ago, you can almost like feel he was writing the stories about modern people, contemporary Chinese, like himself or even me, how to deal with the setbacks and the obstacles in life. And this is a very, very, very inspiring book for me for 2020 because it has, by Chinese, has nearly 3,000 pages. So it's a huge book. But you never feel bored by this because it's one story after another. And basically, it's teaching you when the world is so hostile and when everything you cherished has been taken away from you, and how you survive and how you make your life worse, these sufferings. And of course, Zhu Dongpo is one of the greatest Chinese poets. So the whole book is weaved with these beautiful poems and explanations of why this kind of these processes, these lines, these sentences have specific meanings for the modern world. The one story I particularly impressed is that Zhu Shi, at the age about 40, he was being thrown into the jail, and he had no idea whether he would be killed or not. After he was released from the prison, and how he started to cherish more about everything he has once held as not ordinary in the world, in terms of his relationship with the brothers, his relationship with the friends, and how he see the crowds, the trees. And these are very, very interesting anecdotes, and I really enjoyed the book much. I don't know whether it has the English copy or not, but I certainly recommend everyone to read this.
I was just going to ask, so what is the name of the book in Chinese?
It's called Zhu Dongpo Xing Zhuan.
Gotcha. The new biography of Zhu Shi or Zhu Dongpo. And last question, where can our audience find you?
Oh, well, there's also a page on SMP, and I leave my email address there. And I'm always welcome to, different views and inputs, suggestions, ideas, criticisms, complaints. So, yes, I'm always open.
And that is our first and definitely not the last time that we are going to be covering 2 sessions here on Analyze Asia. And I'm so thankful that we had someone as veteran as yourself, Zhou Xin, to talk about this topic with us. And I'm sure our audience really appreciated your intake as well. So thank you so much, Zhou Xin, for coming onto the show. And I'm sure we will talk again in the future.
Thank you, Carol.